All right, let's get started. I'm sitting here with Udo Grashoff, a lecturer at the School of Slavonic and Eastern European Studies at the University College London. Udo has published his book on the practice of squatting in East Germany. His book's title is Schwarzwohnen, which is a German word for squatting. Udo, thank you very much for agreeing to do this brief interview with us. And my very first question would be, how's the situation with informal housing and squatting in Eastern Europe different than in the rest of the world?
So actually that is the question of our workshop, and so it is impossible to give a definite answer now. But we have some ideas what could be different in the East. And that is, if we compare informal housing in West and East, then there is a certain degree of visibility and publicity, and there are movement structures in the West. And there are less movement structures or no movement structures at all in the East. And in many case studies, it turns out that informal housing and squatting in the East is rather invisible, cautious, in many cases restrained and apolitical practice, and this might be, at least to some extent, different from what we know about squatting practices in Western Europe, but also in the global South to some extent.
All right, good. And the role of socialism, or let's say post-socialism, in the emergence of these numerous squatter settlements in the region?
So Eastern Europe is in many regards different regarding the context. And so on the one hand, socialism and so the communist dictatorships have a legacy of a strong state. And so the strong state had the ambition to control almost everything. And so control is one factor, and this totalitarian or authoritarian ambition has created in Eastern Europe a general climate of fear, or at least of more cautious and more restrained and more disciplined attitudes. And so this might have influenced the practices of informal housing. Not the occurrence of informal housing as such, but how it was practiced. So this is one aspect, and the other aspect is that the communist regimes are not only characterized by their technical reinforcement of rules, but also by their ideals. And so there is this utopian ideal of welfare, of the right to housing, and this is the second legacy. And so in a way this is quite contradictory, so the two tendencies. We have also a long-term legacy that the right to housing is something that is kind of a common consensus in many regions in the former Soviet bloc and in Central Asia. And so, whereas the first aspect is rather a negative influence, the second aspect is rather conducive to informal housing, because it creates a certain consensus or a certain overlap of understanding of housing, and so even authorities consider this, at least to some extent, as justified to occupy a building or to build something illegally or informally or without authorization. So there might be a bigger degree of willingness to legalize or to tolerate informal housing in the East. But we have to substantiate these preliminary ideas.
Okay, and the last question, why do you think we should study informal housing and squatting practices in this region?
So what we can definitely say, instead of the fact that we have this conference now, it's under-researched and it's widely unknown, this phenomenon, because of the specific practices the invisibility and the rather restrained attitude of many people who took part in informal housing. And on the one hand, I can just say we can perhaps discover uncharted territory, something that has been unknown so far. And on the other hand, I think it will, these hidden stories of Eastern Europe and Central Asia will also modify our general understanding of the region. And so it will add some nuances, and it will perhaps also challenge stereotypes about Eastern Europe and about post-Soviet states. And so perhaps even Eastern Europe is perhaps much more interesting and much more contradictory than the stereotype might let us expect.
Oh, yeah, let's see.
Yeah.
Udo, thank you very much again for this interview, and we're looking
You're
forward
welcome.
to the continuation of the workshop. Thank you.